Okay, welcome back once again. I hope everyone's relaxed and happy after a nice meal. So it's my pleasure to introduce David Schlangen, who is going to talk about dialogue semantics and pragmatics. So as you can see, we are now moving also to more procedural and agent-centric things that are to do with how you actually organize communication among people or among artificial agents, maybe following the similar ideas and models. And very much looking forward to this presentation, and we'll leave the floor to David without further ado.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so first of all, I apologize for making you come out of the sun into this room here, and also you have my sympathy if you should you fall asleep after the very hearty lunch earlier. I do my best and try not to fall asleep myself. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about basically is how shared meaning is constructed between participants in an interaction. So as Michael said, it's very much about how humans do this. It's about semantics. It's not so much about evolution, I'm afraid, but it's about how shared, I prefer to call this shared meaning or shared content is created in interaction. The first part is going to be pretty foundational, pretty basic stuff. My understanding was that most of you don't have a background in linguistics, so it's roughly what a Pragmatics 101 class would cover, or at least touching on this. So if you're familiar with this, it might be, well, it might be familiar to you, but this will sort of set the basics also for the second part, where we'll be talking more about our own work in using this in artificial systems. Yeah, the sequencing is a little bit unfortunate because in Simon Kirby's talk, he used a lot of these concepts, which I will be explaining here. But maybe in retrospect, this will make some things more clear. Okay, without further ado, I'll start in the foundational part. And to explain the concepts here, I summoned all my design skills to come up with these illustration of two communicative agents, A and B, Anne and Bill, perhaps. And let's imagine a situation where Anne has reasons to believe what I've depicted here. She has reasons to believe that there's a tiger hiding behind a bush. And she would like B to believe this as well. Okay, so, and what she will do is she will, in a specific way, contract her vocal cords and change the relative positioning of her articulatory organs and produce changes in air pressure, right? And these changes in air pressure, they are observed by Bill here. And we end up, maybe something else is happening as well. And we end up with a situation where you can't see anything much. We end up with a situation where Bill has a belief that is sufficiently similar to the belief that Anne started out with. If you could actually see this, you would see that Bill maybe didn't pay attention in biology class very well, because this is actually a leopard, and she had a belief about a tiger. But for the purposes they have in this moment, we can assume that this is sufficiently good, that this has been is successful, an instant of successful communication. So in some sense, something has been transferred, or actually a better way of a better metaphor is that something has been shared now. So they share a belief. Transfer is not such a good metaphor, even though it's often used, because Anne still has this belief. It's not gone from one head to the other, but rather it's now a shared belief. Philosophers tend to have had long discussions about what sharing means here. I think for your generation, this is not a problem anymore. It's sharing in the file sharing sense, right? Where you share something, but you don't actually have less after sharing it, right? Not like you would share a cake where you actually have to divide it up. Okay, so the situation is fairly clear here, and it's a very simple scene, but we will go through this at great length through this setup, because if you think about it, it's actually quite remarkable what happened here. And on purpose, I described it slightly funny with creating changes in air pressure, but the only connection between these two minds was through observable physical events, in this case through sound waves. And as we will see, a lot needs to be the case for something like this to actually work. And we want to formalize this a little bit. If you want to formalize this a little bit, you have this typical setup here as an agent, actually two agents involved here, and they perceive, decide, and act. And the question is, what's going on here? How do they go from perceptions to decisions on how to act upon this? And I will fill in this question mark a little bit in this part. Okay. Right, so here's our little situation. Of course, Anne didn't produce just any kind of sound, obviously, right? We can assume that she probably produced something that contained something that sounds like tiger, right? But why did she do that? I mean, there's nothing special, there's no logical connection. You all know this, but I'll repeat it anyways. There's no logical connection, obviously, between the sound tiger and this idea, this concept up there. And in fact, Anne herself, in a different situation, speaking to a different other person, may have said something like tiger, or she may have said tora, or she may have said hu, or tigri, or in fact, in a different world, she may very well have said chicken. Right? So there's obviously nothing that necessarily connects the tiger sound stream with this. Right? So there's a sense in which this connection is arbitrary, the connection between the concept of a tiger and the label we use for it. But there's another sense in which it very much isn't arbitrary. In this situation, speaking to this bee, it is very much not arbitrary. She's not at liberty to say chicken in this situation, right? This might lead to a bad end if she does this, right? Okay, so what we have here is they don't know it, and we normally don't analyze it, but what we have here is a coordination problem. And I think Simon alluded to this yesterday a little bit, but I'll make it a bit more specific what the coordination problem is here. So if we assume, simplifying very much, obviously, if we assume that there are only two possible situations we could be in, one is a tiger kind of situation where there's a tiger behind the bush, and the other is a chicken type situation where there's a chicken behind the bush. And we only have two labels. We have the label that sounds like tiger, and we have the label that sounds like chicken. Okay? Now, Anne, when she wants to communicate, Anne is the one who has knowledge about which situation we're in, right? And when Anne wants to communicate this information, which situation we're in, to B, she has this choice here, these choices here of mappings, okay? So she can map the tiger situation to the sound stream tiger, and the chicken situation to the sound stream chicken, or vice versa. We assume that it matters, this information matters for B, right? So B will presumably act differently depending on which situation he believes they are in, because the chicken is food, and for the tiger, Anne and Bill are food. So quite different types of situations. Okay, And the way you formalize it, I'm guessing you have all seen this in game theory, is that these selections come with outcomes, have outcomes, and what we basically want is that they make the same choices, okay? It's fairly straightforward. And basically what it means to have a coordination problem is that you have two alternatives that are equally preferred by the agents. It doesn't really matter for them which of these two alternatives they choose, but it matters to them that they choose one that has a good payoff, because the other ones lead to a bad outcome. Okay, so this part I guess is clear. They have a coordination problem, and that's one where everyone's payoff, so the outcome of the situation, depends on everybody's actions. So there's their interdependent decisions, and their interests coincide. And there are two or more equally good alternatives for how everyone could act. A game of poor coordination is one where the payoffs are equal in every cell, but that's not necessary for this to work. So they have a coordination problem here, or at least we can analyze the situation as one where there is a coordination problem, and they have to solve this coordination problem, because otherwise, they may end up hungry or they may end up eaten, which is both not very good. Okay, so how do you solve coordination problems? And here's a little interactive exercise for you that's going to show you how you, well, one way of solving it's going to make the concept of a coordination problem more clear to you, and it's also showing whether you paid attention at Simon's talk yesterday, because he briefly mentioned this, but I'm hoping he didn't take away completely everything of this exercise. So if you haven't already, please take out something to write now. And I will ask you to write something down, but very crucially, without making any contact to your neighbors. So it's just you and your piece of paper, okay? You don't, if you want to take part in this, you don't have to all do this. But the important part is that you don't make any connections with your neighbors, okay? For you, I will make an exception. You can your paper is so last century, I know. I'm sorry. Okay, so here's what I want you to write down, or I want you to imagine. I say, let's stop now. Come on, this is getting old. We will meet again tomorrow at 9 a.m. If we are not all in the same place then, we just call it quits. The summer school is over. Okay? So leave now. We'll reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. And you should all be there, otherwise something bad happens. You're not allowed to say anything at all. You want the school to be on, because that's what this, otherwise it happened. Otherwise you will be charged for the hotel cost. I will have to raise the costs here for you. Write down where you would go. Now, write down the location where you would go, where you would be tomorrow at 9 a.m. without saying anything, without making any contact to your neighbors. Okay? But the important part is you all have to be here. If even one of you is missing, you will have to pay for your rooms yourself. Okay? You wrote something down. Okay. So this was the first situation. No talking, please, yet. Okay? Second situation. We are under attack by some unspecified bad entity. Everybody run away. We will meet tomorrow in Naples. Write down where you would try to go and when you would try to be there to meet again. And again, if we are not all together, then I don't know, something bad, something even worse happens. You all want to meet tomorrow in Naples. Where would you go? And if you're not all there, it's bad. Okay. All right. So these were obviously coordination problems, right? The idea was, I hope I got this across, the idea was that you need to act in a coordinated manner for this to work. But also you had to solve this without being allowed to make any contact. So where would you go? What did you write down for the first question? Here, yeah, of course. I'm guessing everybody would have written down to come here at 9 a.m. in the morning. That's pretty clear. That's easy. Okay, this one was a little bit harder. Does anyone want to volunteer? Yeah, I will repeat it. Don't bother with the microphone. And what time? Did you write down a time as well?
Oh, it's this time. No, sorry.
Okay. So has anybody written down? So the answer was harbor for the video. Has everybody written down harbor, or has anybody written down something else? Town hall. Okay. No, fair enough. I mean, these are the typical answers. Harbor, again, is a good answer because you've all been there. Other typical answers would be sort of central square or central train station. Other answers people use. Did anyone write down a time? 9, okay. Okay. Okay, so you would all have been doomed. It's clear you wouldn't have, he would have been the odd one out, and you're all doomed because he wrote down something else, and we had different times, but yeah?
Because we can't communicate.
Yes.
So I wrote down, we'll all meet in Naples.
Fun?
We'll all meet in Naples because that's the one place I know everybody knows that they need to get to.
Where? But Naples was given away. Naples was given away.
Yeah. Okay. It has to be. We have to be all together in this place.
Yes. You have to.
Right.
You have to.
I thought we just had to all together.
I don't know. Hold hands at that point. Okay. So how did you solved? And what you solved here was they're called Schelling games after an American economist who actually got the Nobel Prize for his work on conflict, modeling this as with game theory. So Simon Kirby mentioned this yesterday. So you solved these well, I think the first coordination problem was solved sufficiently. And the way you used it, you used precedence, right? Yeah, there was a very strong precedence effect because we've been meeting at 9 a.m. in this room for the past 2 days. So that one was easy, right? But the point was you had to think about, if I managed to set it up correctly, you had to think about not only what you would do, but you also had to think about what the others would do. And importantly, you had to think about what the others would think the others would do, including you, right? So there's a nice recursion effect there. And one way to get out of this is by using precedence. And the other way is using salience, a very salient feature. And things like the central station are very salient. Here, I think precedence sort of interfered, and because we've all been to the harbor in Naples, you kind of use precedence as well in your attempt to solve this. And also, it's not that straightforward to really distinguish these things. But the point I wanted to make here is that solving coordination problems, thinking about solutions for coordination problems involves this thinking about what the others think, and the others also think about you. So there's the spiral here. Okay, so there are coordination devices you can use to solve coordination problems. Precedence and salience are typical ones. Also explicit agreement, and we've heard about this earlier today. I explicitly ruled out this as a way of doing it for you here. But of course, if you have the chance to explicitly agree on something, that's a very good way of doing it. But none of those really describe the situation we have with N and Bob, Bill, whatever I said, and A and B, right? We can assume if what they were using is really language, right? It's not really about precedence that she said tiger, something that involved the word tiger. And it certainly is not about salience. There's nothing really salient about the sound tiger when you think you're in a tiger situation. It's also probably not explicit agreement that made her say this, right? She has never really explicitly agreed for this mapping of label and labeled thing. So rather, the natural thing to assume that was what was at play here is to say it was convention. Okay. Now, what is convention? David Lewis, in his seminal book with the same title, he had an approach to defining what convention is. I'm not going to go through all of this here now. And also, since he made this initial formulation, sort of a little cottage industry in philosophy or linguistics has sprung up trying to punch hole in this definition. So this isn't necessarily the one that is currently assumed to be the best for convention. But the important point that I need here for my story is convention is a regularity in the behavior of members of a population when they are agents in a recurrent situation as, if and only if it is true that, and it is common knowledge in P that everyone conforms to it, everyone expects everyone else to conform to it, everyone has approximately the same preferences regarding all possible combinations, and so on. Okay. The important part here is the concept of common knowledge. That we assume that it is common knowledge. In our particular case, it's common knowledge that the label we use for a tiger situation is tiger and not chicken, and the label for a chicken situation is chicken and not tiger. Okay, so there's a convention that rules that determines this mapping. Common knowledge is a pretty strong concept, right? Common knowledge or mutual knowledge. A lot is required for this to work, and it's not an unproblematic notion. So common knowledge is that I know that you know, that I know that you know, and so on, right? And as computer scientists, you immediately see that a potential problem there. If that's an infinite recursion, then we will be thinking for a long time before we reach any decision. But I'm not going to, I will come back to this a little bit, but not now. So for now, we can assume that where before there was a question mark here inside of the agent, we can now assume that we have beliefs. That's what we started with. Yep, sorry. Yes.
On the previous slide, bullets 4 and 5 had this term, at least all but one, and I didn't understand what's that about? Why you allowed an exception? It seems kind of...
Oh, I think this is actually copy-paste. You're good at spotting copy-paste errors. I think that shouldn't be there. That's very good. I don't think that should be there. I think it should be that should only be here, right? It should? Never mind. I wasn't intending to go through these clauses anyways. I mean, these clauses are just meant to catch the fact that, yeah, we don't want deviations from this. Okay, so the point that this was supposed to be making here is that we not only need beliefs. We started with this, right? So the agents individually can have beliefs about the situation. But we also need mutual beliefs, right? We need beliefs that include the other person and that include the other person's beliefs about our beliefs. Okay, so where are we on a little tour into how meaning is created in conversation? We now have the notion of conventional meaning. And obviously I was jumping ahead quite a bit. But let's say we have now a notion of conventional meaning that includes syntax and semantics traditionally, that gives us the conventional meaning of utterances. And part of the story then is that words and utterances have conventional meanings. But is that the end of the story, the conventional meanings? So the conventional meanings, they have helped us explaining the sharing of disbelief, because there's a conventional meaning for tiger. It's actually interesting to think about what exactly these conventional meanings specify. If it is good enough here for Bill to think of something like this, or to include this under the concept, which isn't actually a tiger. But maybe the core of the conventional meaning here is a big cat-like thing that is dangerous, right? So, but the notion of the idea of a conventional meaning, I guess, is fairly intuitive. But the question now is whether this is enough. You're trying to fix the audio. It's too late now, I think. It's okay. Yeah. Okay, so conventional meanings help us here, but what about this? What's the conventional meaning of that? Does anyone have an idea what the conventional meaning of that is? The conventional meaning of that is this table? Whatever I'm pointing at. Okay, so it is clear that the conventional meaning of that bush cannot be the particular bush they're talking about, right? It can be something like whatever you are indicating to me, right? So the conventional meaning of that n, where n is a noun, is that thing that falls under the label n, which you're indicating to me in some way or other, okay? So there is a conventional meaning here, but we also need to plug something into this conventional meaning, right? There's a variable in there, and that's not a strange thing. There are many classes of words that do this. Some even argue that you almost get no meanings that don't in some way need contextual input to be fully specified, but some word classes are very clear on this. So the conventional meaning of I is the speaker, right? And actually I could go on and on. Saw, the tense here, I saw, the tense means it happened before the time of speaking, right? So I is the speaker. Right, then there are also these contextual things, they also hit you even where you don't really think they hit you. So this is something that made the rounds on Twitter a while ago. So these are apparently two books that exist, right? So one book is What They Teach You at Harvard Business School, and the other book is What They Don't Teach You at Harvard Business School. You can assume that this is not meant, the idea is not, even though it sounds like it, the idea is not that these two books together cover the whole of human knowledge, right? You intuitively understand that what this means is what they teach you about business at Harvard Business School and what they don't teach you about business at Harvard Business School, right? So we have a quantification here, everything, every x, but the domain of quantification is specified contextually, in this case, by your knowledge that, yeah, books about, this is a business book and it will only contain things about business here. Okay, so here it is already getting a little bit complicated, the reasoning, how you would get the context in here. But maybe you can still make a story that tells you that conventionally there are holes for the context here. Before I show you that there are cases where it's getting more complicated to think this, we need to take a step back and think a little bit about what needs to be the case when we want to call this a situation where A told B that there's a tiger behind the bush, right? So we are looking at this from the outside now, and we're describing what happened, and we're describing it as a situation where A told B that P. Okay? So the first element is clearly this. A intends to achieve that B believes that P. Okay? So that's what we actually started with. So A has this tiger in her head, and she wants there to be a tiger in B's head as well. So A intends B to believe that this is the case. Okay, so what about a situation where then A grabs B's hand and she leads B around the corner, and then B sees the tiger? Is that a situation where A told B that there's a tiger behind the bush? Would we call this telling? Her dragging him? No, we wouldn't call this telling. We would call this showing or something else, right? Okay, so now you may think that the crucial element here is that language is involved, but how about A writes down in her notebook the sentence, "There's a tiger behind the bush." And then she pretends to be falling asleep, leaving the notebook open, and she knows that B has this habit of reading her notebook when she is asleep. So she falls asleep, she pretends to fall asleep, she has the notebook open, and B goes there and reads this, and now has the belief that there's a tiger behind the bush. Has she told B that there's a tiger behind the bush? Again, no. In both these cases, she has been successful in this, right? She has reached her intention of making B believe that there's a tiger behind the bush. But we would still not call this telling, right? So there seems to be something missing here, and leave the cat out of the bag. The missing thing, according to Grice's analysis, actually, the missing thing here is for something to be a telling, we want the telling to be the dominant factor in causing the belief, right? We want the belief to be caused by our language use, or by the behavior we're performing, right? So a communicative intention is only satisfied if both of these things are the case. So A intends to achieve that B believes that P, and B is supposed to be forming this belief by recognizing the intention, right? It sounds slightly odd, but the main takeaway message here is, I think it actually ties in nicely with the discussion we had yesterday about the rational or irrational behavior in the game, right? In Simon Kirby's talk. So he called it irrational behavior, but I think the more important point was it was behavior that was deviating from the purpose of the game, but it was behavior that was recognizable as carrying something more than actual just function in the game. It was recognizable as intending to convey something. Okay, so that's Herbert Paul Grice's definition of meaning, of non-natural meaning, is one where that succeeds, where the intention to communicate something succeeds by the other person recognizing that they are supposed to believe something, and they are supposed to believe it by recognizing the intention of the others. Okay? Yeah?
Is that the same as Grice's notion of implicature?
It's not the same, no. So Grice is famous for, he made two contributions. He made a contribution of implicature and non-natural meaning. This is the other. I will come to implicature in a second.
And would you say this is equal to like a speech act?
Yes, I guess. Equal, maybe not, because Speech Act wants to make distinctions within this, but it is, Speech Acts have communicative intentions behind them, yes. Okay, so what we have now is in our little picture of the agents of their mental states. We have beliefs, we have mutual beliefs, and we have intentions. We have communicative intentions. Sorry, yes.
Just very quickly, on the previous slide. So there's clearly something, it's not sufficient clearly to say A intended to achieve that B believes that P by telling B that P. You're adding, I mean, there's the extra thing that you're adding, which is that B also recognizes that.
Yes.
It's not enough just to say that for certain reasons, I imagine. It's not enough simply to say that by telling. So it has to be the recognition that it's telling to achieve.
Well, I mean, what this is trying to do is it's trying to make more clear what we pre-theoretically mean when we say telling. It's kind of an explanation of what the special source is that makes telling different from causing someone to know, right? Because that was the point with the notebook example. Causing someone to know is not enough. We want them, for it to be telling, the reason for them to know must be because they recognize that we wanted to.
It could be that A intended to communicate by telling, but B found out not through the telling.
That could be, yeah. Okay. So there are lots of examples with Herodes and the head of John the Baptist, and Salome getting the knowledge that John the Baptist is dead, but you don't really need to tell when he's showing the severed head. He's not really telling; it's showing, right? But it's actually quite fun. You can construct examples that fail at variously higher levels of the mutual knowledge chain, but for now, the take-home message here is that the intentions behind the utterance matter. That's the point I wanted to make here. Okay, and with this in hand, that we also need to think about the intentions behind the utterance, we can explain a couple more cases. For example, let's say this was embedded in a longer conversation. So B said, "What did you see behind that bush?" And A says, "A tiger." Right? And that's a very mundane, typical way of answering a question, right? But the conventional meaning of a tiger is clearly not, "I saw a tiger behind the bush," right? If you want to be precise. The conventional meaning of a tiger is, well, it's the concept of a tiger or something. It's not, "I saw a tiger behind the bush," right? If you want to be very precise, you have to explain where the missing parts are coming from, right? And here it's very straightforward. It's actually very difficult to explain to people that there's a problem here, because it's so clear that the context supplies this missing information. If this is to be treated as an answer to this, then it can only mean there's a tiger behind the bush, right? But clearly context had to supply these missing bits. Okay, what about this one? What is she saying here? She's probably saying, the way I've set it up here, she's probably saying no with this, right? But let's assume we are on a safari. They're on a safari, right? And they are safely in their jeep. Then this might be, yeah, absolutely, right? So the context of use and the context of use can lead us to completely opposite ways of understanding the contribution made with this, right? And for this, we need to reason about the intentions, and this agent here needs to be able to reason about the intentions of the speaker. here. Okay. Do you see how this can also be a yes, right? So in a different situation. And clearly, we cannot put this on the conventional meaning of this utterance, right? So it has to come from somewhere else. Okay. Let's assume she says, well, there's something that looks a bit like a tiger behind that bush. That sounds odd, right? And B would be forgiven, I think, if he thinks, okay, it's not a tiger, right, and forms a different belief. Maybe not in the bush. This, again, you cannot see this clearly, but this is not a tiger. This is something that looks a bit like a tiger, but it's actually a human infant dressed up as a tiger. Now, why would he be justified? Maybe not in the situation I described. Maybe not if they're in the jungle. But why would he be justified to think this? Because, I mean, with the conventional meaning, it's a bit weird. Something that looks a bit like a tiger. No, sorry. Something that looks a lot like a tiger also looks a bit like a tiger, right? And a tiger looks a lot like a tiger, right? So just based on the conventional meanings, this could perfectly describe that she thinks there's a tiger behind the bush. So there seems to be something that pulls us away from assuming that her communicative intention was there's a tiger behind that bush. But what is that? Yeah.
Uncertainty of it being a tiger coming through the way she's describing it, and also a lack of urgency perhaps to the way she's transferring it.
Okay, yeah, maybe, yeah, in this situation, it is not a good fit with what we would expect in this situation, right? So, and again, this is the second contribution by Grice. He had this idea of conversational maxims that people implicitly follow, and the maxim that's violated here is maybe one of quantity, or maybe of manner. Maybe it's an unnecessarily complicated description. If it really was a tiger behind the bush, then she just should have said a tiger, right? Even though logically a tiger is included in this description, right? So she's violating a conversational maxim. And the idea is that we need to have a reason for doing this. And the reason for doing this, in this case, may be that, in fact, it is not a tiger, right? So she wants to convey uncertainty or something, right? It actually comes into play at two places here. If we say something looks a bit like X, we are implying that it does not look completely like X, even though that is the case, right? Even though logically it would still be compatible calling something that is X, something that looks a bit like X. Okay, you take, no, okay, you. Okay.
So do these kind of ambiguities or problems, would they get significantly simpler if you didn't worry so much about the word meaning? I mean, you know, if we were referring to labels and things where there was no, you know, so let's say you would write it down in logic, let's say, right? And you just exchange those messages. Would then the contextual problem be simpler to analyze?
I would hope that if you write it down in logic, there would be no potential for ambiguities. You would write it down more specifically.
Well, I mean, the intention could still be, or like, you know, the coordination aspect might still be hidden. You might not explicate it. Mm-hmm. So there might be still kind of pragmatic ambiguity. But I'm just wondering to what extent the dialogue perspective with the semantic perspective interact here, and whether if you could separate them, things would become easier. But also if you can. I mean, I'm not sure you can.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand it completely, but let me try to explain it a different way. What I'm getting at here is that conventional meanings, without regard for the situation of use, don't really help you very far. So if you're specifying the conventional meanings, you would still need to do the reasoning about what the intention, the underlying intention was, what A actually wanted to communicate in this situation. That's the point here. Okay, so this was a very sort of tour de force through the concept of non-conventional meaning. That basically hits you, when you look at utterances, it hits you everywhere. Right? So, and I just more or less, well, not completely randomly, but I just selected a couple of phenomena, but there are many more, and you can spend your whole career trying to analyze this. So what I looked was, what I selected were indexicals, but also these non-sentential utterances. I selected those because I think 2 of the 3 people who wrote their PhD thesis on this are in this room. That would be Raquel and me, separate PhD thesis. So that's a topic you can spend a lot of time on to explain how these things get their meaning in context. Yeah, and the cooperativity principle, I should mention this. So under the assumption that B is playing the same game as A is, and B is not trying to be willfully obtuse or willfully wordy or trying to be funny or something, if we make this assumption, then we have to look for a reason in this situation here. We have to look for a reason why she's using so many words, right? Why she is giving this formulation where she could use a much shorter formulation, right? She's spending a lot of energy here, moving her mouth. She better has a good reason for this, because in contrast, there would be a shorter message that would encode the standard meaning here. Okay, is this idea roughly clear? So where are we? We have conventional meaning, we have communicative intentions, and with the communicative intentions, I'm thinking about communicative intentions, we have non-conventional meaning. And again, we can ask if that is all. Well, this is already more than linguistics and philosophy of language has looked at for a long time, because I've set it up from the beginning as something that gives B a job as well, right? So, and B's job was to think about A's intentions. And syntax, the fields of syntax and semantics, they don't really worry about the effect of this on the speaker. But we can analyze this communication situation as one, we can go further. So we assume that A says this. A says there's a tiger behind that bush. And now B is thinking that A said there's a tiger behind that bush. And based on this, based on B's belief that that's what A said, B forms a belief of his own. He may not want to believe her, but at least he needs to think that this is the situation we're in, a situation where A said that. But presumably, since A wanted to share this belief, presumably that's not the end of the situation, right? Why is that not the end of the situation? What do you assume that would happen now?
He has to decide whether he believes.
Okay, he has to decide whether to believe this or not. And what about A? So let's say A says there's a tiger behind that bush, and B goes, B now has in his head the belief that A said this, and maybe also the belief that there's a tiger behind the bush. But well, A would probably say, "Hey, are you listening to me?" Did you understand? There's a tiger behind that bush, right? So A really wants to believe that this is what A wants to believe that this is what B believes now. B should believe that A said this, right? Otherwise, A, depending on how urgent the situation is, otherwise A would say something, right? So if B wants to preempt that A is going on forever about this tiger, B is better doing something, better, right? B should do something. Maybe just say, oh, okay, right? So the idea here, what I'm trying to work my way towards is we want mutual knowledge, right? The assumption is that they want to create mutual knowledge, well, A wants this to be mutual knowledge, that A said it. A probably also wants it to be mutual knowledge that there's a tiger, that the belief that there's a tiger, but at the very least, the belief that that's what A said. The outcome would be that this is mutual knowledge. But this here is, of course, impossible, right? They have two separate minds. They have two separate brains. They cannot have the same thought, at least in a materialistic sense. They can have two tokens of the same thought. But in reality, what they have to, what has to suffice for them is the illusion that this is the case, right? So they want to reach the belief that they have a mutual belief about the communicative system, situation. Okay, and with this we come to the theory of grounding, a contribution by, this is connected to Herb Clarke's work, a psychologist and linguist. But these are ideas that other people have developed in the same time. Jens Auwood, for example, but Clarke's theory is better known. And to explain this theory of grounding, how they ground the situation in mutual belief, we need to think a little bit about it, that they're doing. And to do this, we have to look at elevators, apparently. So, what's going on here? What's happening on this picture? How would you describe what's happening here? If you could see it, can you actually see anything? Yeah, you can see it well enough. So what's happening here? And again, I will repeat it. Don't worry with the microphone. Yes? The woman pushes the button to call the elevator. Okay? So she does something to do something. Okay? Does anyone have another description of what's going on here? No? No one wants to give the description. The woman is standing in front of the elevator, okay? Or maybe the woman is extending her left arm and the left hand touches the elevator button. Okay, no one wants to give this description. But it is a true description of what's going on here, right? But you actually gave two descriptions, sort of an intention, one with the intention to do something else. But I mean, we could describe this here as she's pressing her finger against the up button. That's certainly true, right? But it seems to be not enough as a description of the situation, right? So we can say she's pressing the up button. And there's a relation between these two things, right? So she's pressing her finger against the up button to press the up button, right? So this action here is generated by this action, right? She's activating the up button, okay? She's calling the elevator, and this is probably what we would normally, how we would normally describe the action that's depicted here, right? She's getting the elevator to come, and maybe something we don't know from this picture would be she's on her way home, or she's trying to get to her room, but that we can't know from this picture here. Okay, so the idea here is that these are in fact different actions that she's performing. But she's performing them all at the same time, and there's a certain kind of relation between these actions. So this action is generated by this action, right? But how do we know that these are separate actions, or that these are different ways of describing the same situation? Can you imagine how a situation where it would not be felicitous, when not all of these labels would apply? Okay, maybe she is pranking someone. Okay, that's maybe possible. She's not getting through with all of those, but maybe not. Yeah.
The up button isn't actually working, so she's pressing it, but she's certainly not activating it.
Exactly. So that's the main criterion here is they can fail independently, right? Not completely independently, but there's an order to it, but they can fail. I mean, she may be pressing her finger against the up button, but the spring inside has got stuck. She's not actually depressing it. Or maybe she may be pressing it, but it's not connected to anything, right? In which case she isn't actually activating the up button. She's pressing it, but she's not activating it, right? And so on. Okay, so the idea that Clark uses here, building on the philosophy of actions, of acting, the idea is that there's a ladder of actions here, right? And the metaphor of the ladder, well, the point is that you have to go through you have to step up the rungs in order to get up there, right? And the principle here is that of upwards completion. In a ladder of actions, it is only possible to complete an action from the bottom level up through any level in the ladder, right? So these, I said they can fail independently, but they can only fail sort of from the bottom up. It's not possible to get the elevator to come if you didn't actually press the call button. If pressing the call button failed, then the elevator will not come in this particular situation, right? So really, with the action you're performing, all the descriptions have to be true, and they have to be true, so to speak, in order from the bottom up. Following from this, a corollary of this, principle of upward completion, that you have to go through all these actions. It's very important to understand that these are, if you're more comfortable with this, these are different ways of describing the same physical event, right? These are not different actions that come one after another. These are different ways of analyzing. If everything went well, right? So if she did actually get the elevator to come, these are different ways of analyzing the same eventuality, the same event on different levels of granularity, right? But the criterion for making decision here is that you can that they can fail on their way upwards. Okay, is this roughly clear? Okay, so a corollary of this upwards completion is the downward evidence. If you have evidence on a higher rung of this ladder that it worked, then from this you can infer that the lower levels also worked, right? So if you're pressing this thing and the elevator comes, then this is good evidence for assuming that you actually activated the up button, right? If the elevator is not coming, it's not completely clear what failed, right? I can jump ahead a little bit. People like feedback on this, right? And that's the reason why there's typically a light on the on elevator buttons, right? You feel much better if you actually know, if you get some feedback that you actually activated the up button, right? Okay, I will come back to this example. Okay, so obviously Clark wasn't mostly interested in elevators. It's introduced because he analyzes the communication situation as one where we go through this. But crucially, what we have here are joint actions. Right? So these are actions that both A and B have to perform, and they have to perform in unison. But again, there's this ladder which we can analyze this situation. Right? So in a communicative situation, what A has to do, A is the speaker here, A has to execute behavior, and B's job is to attend to the behavior, right? So that's the lowest level, that's the equivalence to pushing your hand against the button. That's sort of the lowest level of description we want to give here. You execute behavior, you produce sound pressure changes, and your interlocutor has to attend to this behavior. That's their part. On a higher level description of what you're doing is you have to present a signal. Very roughly, you have to present a conventional meaning, something that has a conventional meaning. So it's not enough to just produce any kind of sound changes, any kind of air pressure changes, any kind of sound. It has to be something that is a signal, that is intended to be a signal, and the signal has to be identified on the other side, right? So that's the next level of this hierarchy. On the next level above this, you have to have a content you want to signal, and your interlocutor must be able to identify this, to recognize what this content is, recognize your communicative intentions. And on the highest level, you're proposing actually to do something together, and your interlocutor needs to take this up. So this is the level that some people here are interested in. This is the level that we had earlier, where B has to think about whether he wants to believe the claim that there's a tiger. So the joint project here would be believe that there's a tiger behind the bush. Okay, how do you know that this is a sensible analysis of the communicative situation? Well, again, they can fail independently. It's the same story as with the elevator, right? So let's assume A says there's a tiger behind that bush, and B is looking away, and B keeps looking away, and nothing happens. So then perhaps we can assume that A did her part, A executed a behavior, A said something, A made an utterance, but B didn't actually attend to this behavior. So this communicative situation here failed at the very first hurdle, the first step. Or A says there's a tiger behind that bush, and B says, huh? Huh? Right? Now, these kinds of clarification requests, which is the technical name, they are notoriously ambiguous. This huh, in any case, signals some sort of problem. And typically, it's used for a problem, for an acoustic problem, where you didn't actually, you noticed that someone was talking to you, but you didn't quite catch what they were actually saying, right? But you can use the huh for other communication failures as well on higher levels. I just use this here as the most typical for, huh? Say that again? Okay, so A not only succeeded in executing a behavior and B attended to it, but the signal that A presented wasn't identified by B. Okay, there's a tiger behind that bush. Which bush? Right? So now we're a level higher. So B has picked up, B has understood most parts of what was trying to be communicated, but not all. And we still haven't reached the highest level here. Okay. And I'm purposefully leaving out the level above because that's a little bit tricky to know what Clark actually meant there and to know what good situations are for this. But the general principle, the general idea here should be clear that communicating consists in several joint actions, and there's a hierarchy of actions here in which we can analyze this. Right? And the principle of upward completion tells us we can only go through this in this direction. We can't skip any steps. And downward evidence tells us if I have evidence that I'm complete on the top level, I have evidence that all levels below are complete. And that's a very useful principle that I will come back to in a second. Okay, holistic evidence tells us if there's a sequence of actions. If I can analyze an action into smaller sequential actions, then by knowing that I've succeeded in the full action, I know that all parts have succeeded. So this is sort of left to right where this is top down. The important part here is the principle of joint closure that Clark formulates. The participants in a joint action try to establish the mutual belief that they have succeeded well enough for current purposes. Okay, so the idea here is that the participants actively are interested in getting evidence for having succeeded with their joint action. And this holds for both the speaker and the hearer. This can be explained with a different metaphor. The metaphor that there are two tracks in a conversation. So track one is sort of the official business of the dialogue. On track one, we have something like who came to the party, and the answer by the other one is Peter. So I'm changing the example here a little bit. So this is sort of the official business of the dialogue. And on a second track, a parallel track that runs in parallel all the time, we have the question, do you understand what I'm saying? So each utterance, each contribution to a dialogue says, do you understand me? I need confirmation that you actually understood this. But with this answer here, with this Peter answer here, right, this gives us enough evidence to infer a yes here. We don't need an explicit answer, yes, I understood what you said, and here's my answer. By giving a relevant reply to this question, we are giving evidence here that we have understood. Well, we're giving evidence for how we understood this. Okay, and this, in this situation here, is enough evidence for establishing the mutual belief that A has asked this question. Okay, so it may have seemed like a tough requirement to that in this analysis. Both of the communicative participants are required to present evidence that reached mutual knowledge about success of their joint action. But by allowing indirect evidence, it's not such a big problem after all. Okay, so we have the communicative acts, and we have a different design suddenly. These are older slides, they seem to have yellowed a little bit. We have communicative acts and we have meta-communicative acts, and they are performed at the same. By performing communicative acts, we are performing meta-communicative acts as well. This also holds, interestingly, this also holds within one person's utterance. So I briefly introduce another phenomenon here. So it can happen that we do this within our own utterances. I can say something like, well, go straight until you're at the at the right exit. Okay. So this I mean here, this is not part of the official, this is not what I want to, this is not part of the message I have for you. This is more a meta-communicative utterance that says, that signals to you, oh, I'm actually having problems with my own utterance here. I'm taking this back from the official record and I want it to be replaced by this. Okay. It's actually a fascinating topic how these disfluencies, is what they're called, how these self-repairs exactly work. But this is all I'm going to say about this. Okay, I actually answered already how we get out of this, right? So if the presumption is that if I'm doing something, I always want evidence that it succeeded, then you could think that we end up in an infinite loop, right? So A says, I saw a tiger, and B says, okay. And if we really wanted evidence for success all the time, then A would need to provide success for having understood this okay, right? And then B would need to provide success for having understood this, and so on, and we would spend a lot of time doing this. The way out of this that Clark's gives is that the strength of evidence is must be appropriate to the content, let's say, of the importance for current purposes of the contribution you're making, and a back-channel contribution requires less evidence. You can imagine situations where it becomes very important to create mutual knowledge. And in these situations, you will do more work. A typical example is flight control, right? Where you follow a very specific protocol for establishing mutual belief. Something is copied back to you verbatim, and then the person in flight control, so the first person in flight control says something, the pilot copies it back verbatim, and then the person in flight control has to confirm this again in a different way, at least if everything goes right. So there's a lot of effort there in grounding. So the important part is that this manufacturing of mutual belief has to be done well enough for current purposes. And typically it's not that important as in flight control. Okay, so where are we? We are almost done with the first part, I believe. We have conventional meanings, we have communicative intentions, and with this we can get to non-conventional meanings. It's important to remember that the conventional meanings typically play a big role in computing and getting at the non-conventional meanings. Right? It's not as if they are completely useless, but they're not the end of the story. We have joint actions, and we need to actively establish mutual understanding. And the one element that's still missing is that of timing. It's sort of a little bit in here already, right? Because why is the speaker interrupting themselves immediately and not doing it later? Why don't they just end saying, well go straight until you're at the left exit. Oh no, I actually meant at the right exit. Right? That would use a lot of time. So the principle here is that you're providing evidence for that you do your meta-communicative actions as quickly as possible, right? And also here, these joint actions, they need to be coordinated temporally, right? They need to happen jointly. It's not enough for A to execute their behavior and B to attend to this 10 minutes later. It has to happen at the same time. And with this, we are at the question of how do you coordinate a process. And here's a process that's well known to all of us. It also needs coordination, and I think it's a nice example because we all know the awkwardness when this isn't rightly coordinated, right? This process here of the handshake, and here I mean the actual human handshake, not a computer network handshake. Okay, so what needs to be coordinated here? Well, the beginning or the entry of this joint action has to be coordinated. The main part and the exit, how we get out of this joint action, has to be coordinated, right? So we can draw this a little bit like this. Even though these sort of two out-of-phase sine waves, that's probably not the best way because you actually want to move in the same direction as the other person, I guess. But the idea is, yeah. So we need to start A and B when they are shaking hands. They need to enter into this joint action at the same time, and not sort of not one being later than the other, or the other being earlier. And they also need to get out of this at the same time. So what needs to happen is, if we analyze this, they both need to extend their hands, their arms, and give the hand, and then they need to grab the hand. Okay, and all these things can go wrong, right? We all know this when you just get hold of the fingers of the other person rather than the palms. Okay, and then you have to go up and down, up and down. Okay, can I stop now? For this other person, please let go. Oh, this is getting awkward. And then you have to get out, but you have to get out without forcefully extracting your hand, because that would be quite a bad sign, right? So you have to find a way of getting into this action and getting out of it, and it has to be coordinated in some way, okay? The same holds for the action ladder, for the actions in the communicative system situation, right? And so a typical way of this is that you check for the other person's attention in some way, and the other person confirms their attentiveness, right? And then you say and mean something for the other, and while you're doing this, the other person tries to understand what is said, and you monitor for understanding, and you signal your understanding. Okay? And again, what needs to be coordinated here is the beginning and the entry. And in conversation, we have this interesting phenomenon that we are in a longer sequence of actions. So you understand the current joint action as being placed in a sequence in the light of the previous one. And you need to get out of this. And the nice thing about this analysis is it holds at all levels of the conversation. It holds on a very micro level, one contribution, and you need to coordinate that the other person actually understands your contribution and gives you evidence for understanding. But it also applies to the whole joint action that is the conversation, right? So we all know that there are certain, so interestingly, there are certain more well-specified protocols for getting into a conversation, right? Things like you say someone's name, and yes, right? So that's a typical beginning of it's coordinating the entry into a conversation. Interestingly, this is kind of, so Anne is kind of responding to this as if this was a question, right? So Bill says Anne, and Anne says yes, right? What is she saying yes to? She's saying yes to the question, are you ready for entering into a conversation with me, right? Or the telephone ringing, right? The telephone ringing is kind of your extended calling for attention for the other person. And you answer the telephone by saying yes. Well, at least you used to before you saw the name on the display, right? So you enter into the conversation. This part is a little bit less regulated, and we all know how difficult it can be to extract yourself from a conversation, right? And there are typical protocols for sort of suggesting to the other person that you're reaching the end of the conversation, like summarizing or, okay, nice talking to you. We'll meet again at some point in the future, but please let me go. And then the other person starts again with a new topic, and you know you're doomed, right? You didn't quite coordinate the exit phase correctly. Okay, so coordination, temporal coordination is important. On the micro level, oh, here are coordination devices. One party leads in dancing, or there's an external beat, again, in dancing or in music. This doesn't, the leading can sort of happen in conversations. It's the notion of initiative in a conversation. External beat is happening not so often, except that I'm under an external beat here that tells me I have 5 minutes for this part left. But convention, predictability. Language has this nice feature of being predictable, at least structurally predictable. So for the micro coordination of how long are you going to speak, how long is your contribution going to go on for this you can use the fact that syntactic structures are fairly predictable. And that leads to turn-taking patterns. I'm not going to go through all of those. So this is this is meant to be that A is speaking, then there's a brief moment of silence, and then B takes over. So this is a typical pattern in turn-taking. And these silences can be very, very short. Right? They can be under 200 milliseconds, or actually quite often there is a very short overlap or no pause at all, which is an interesting fact about human communication, which you have to explain, right? So human communicators seem to be extremely well coordinated temporally. They seem to just know when one person is going to stop and when it's their turn to speak, right? And the typical way of showing how interesting this capability is by saying it is shorter than 200 milliseconds, so it is shorter typically. It can't be reaction. It can't be a reaction to the other person having finished speaking, because it typically happens with such a short delay that you would not be able to process the fact that the other person has stopped speaking and program your own muscles to produce something. You must have started earlier with the planning of your contribution. That's the point here. Okay. So how do they coordinate the process of conversation? A reactive model will not work. Right? So a model where you wait until the current speaker has stopped will not work. So let me see how much I have here. No. Okay. Yeah, we are almost done. So here's something else that will not work. My demo video, because we don't really have audio. So I'll try anyways. Sort of as a light entertainment at the end of this block. Hello? As a light entertainment at the end of the block. So here is our little robot, Müller 2. Müller 2 is doing turn-taking. Or actually, Müller 2 is tracking a conversation. So you will hear a conversation soon. It's not going to work very well because the conversation is in stereo and you're supposed to, oh yes. And no, this is for this is so that other people can hear something as well. So there's a conversation, one speaker per speaker, so one human speaker. It's in stereo. So speaker A is coming out of this and speaker B is coming out of that. And Müller 2's task is to track who's speaking, right? And he's following different models of doing this. And this is an experiment we recently did, and we had people judge how well they thought that the robot is understanding the conversation, and how well, just by looking at how he's following the conversation. And there are various models here, and one of those is a reactive model where he is just reacting to the fact that the speaker has changed, and other models are predictive, where he's actually predicting who's going to speak next. And other models are actually random. In other models, he's just randomly looking around. So see if you can spot which is which, but it's going to be hard since you're not going to hear the speakers from the different sides. I suggest that you focus on an individual one rather than the whole picture, and then once you have followed one, look at another one.
Ja, super. Nee, ansonsten, ja, Küche, ja.
Und im Wohnzimmer großer Fernseher.
Mhm. Flatscreen.
Filme gucken kann, ja.
Soll der so hängen an der Wand, so wie so ein Bild oder so?
Das wäre schon cool.
Ja.
Ja.
Und dann noch so ein Surround-System. So
Das finde ich auch cool, ja.
für soundmäßig.
Und eine große Couch.
Ja, so eine richtige,
Eckcouch,
ja.
wo man die Beine so hochlegt.
Und die mal auch so, also die so richtig lümmelmäßig ist, so ganz viel Platz. Ja, so ganz breit, so dass sie bis hier geht oder so.
Ja, das finde ich cool.
Ja, cool.
Und ein Bücherregal.
Ja, das muss groß sein bei uns.
Können wir so einen Esstisch haben?
Ja, stimmt.
Okay, I'm going to stop this here because I think you can't really follow anything at all. The point of this experiment was our subjects did manage to distinguish these. Well, we didn't tell them. We told them our robot we are trying different version of this robot's brain. which one do you like better? Which one do you think, after each video has been played, we are asking them, how well did you think the robot was following the conversation? And what you also can't see, which is a shame because we spent a lot of effort, is we gave this guy eyes with movable pupils. So if you know what the Now robot looks like, it normally doesn't have eyes with movable pupils. But we added them, and in this experiment we've shown that they're actually useful. You can signal more things with being able to move your eyes and not just your head all the time. Okay, so this was just some light entertainment here. The point is it bears out even in agent communication that a predictive model is preferred. Okay, so taking stock of this part here, to be able to create shared understanding, having conventional meanings at your disposal is useful. So I reiterate here, I wasn't trying to downplay the role of conventional meanings. Conventional meanings give you a very sophisticated instrument of giving the other person something to work with, but it's only something to work with. You still need to reason about communicative intentions, and you monitor for understanding, and you need to manage the whole process. We end up with something like this, with beliefs, desires, which I didn't talk much about, intentions and obligations. This may be familiar for those of you working in the agent paradigm. We end up with a trusted BDI in here. What I've been giving you here was a super fast run through the history of this field, more from the psychology angle. You will find these references in the slide set. And with this, I'm done with foundations. And in part 2, I will be talking, after the break, I will be talking about computational models, how we replace one of those interactants with a computer, and especially of how we do incremental turn-taking and how we do grounded semantics, how we ground the semantics that the agent is using in the real world, in percepts. But with this, I'm done with the first part. Thank you.